The Cincinnati wind did not feel like weather that night. It felt personal, as if the entire city had leaned in close, drawn a breath through its frozen teeth, and decided to test what was left of me. I was 72 years old, standing on the front porch of a 4-bedroom house I had paid off with 4 decades of factory shifts, overtime, bad knees, early mornings, and the kind of quiet sacrifice nobody notices until they want to measure what can be taken from it. The oak floors behind that door had been refinished with my own hands. The water heater in the basement had been replaced by me 6 months earlier, even though my fingers locked up in cold weather and my left knee had not been right since the surgery. I had painted the front railing twice, cleaned the gutters every fall, repaired the loose brick near the steps, and signed the deed over to my son because I believed a father did not keep score against his own blood. Yet there I was, on a Friday night in December, watching Edward close the door in my face with the flat, tired expression of a man ending an inconvenient conversation, not a son watching his father step into a snowstorm. The last word he gave me was "Dad," and even that did not sound like a name. It sounded like a burden he was tired of carrying. It sounded like a label on a box he had decided to move to the curb. The door clicked shut softly, not slammed, and somehow that was worse. A slam would have admitted emotion. The soft click said procedure. The soft click said final. The soft click said they had already discussed this long before I walked into the kitchen. It said I was only the last person in the house to learn I was leaving. The snow was not falling. It was attacking. It came sideways across Maplewood Avenue in hard white slashes, hitting my cheeks, gathering in the folds of my old brown coat, clinging to the shoulders like ash from a fire nobody could see. The Christmas lights along the porch rail blinked behind me, warm and stupidly cheerful, outlining the house in red and green, while I stood outside it like a man who had misplaced his life. Through the front window, I could see movement in the living room. Not much, just the reflection of Hazel passing across the glass and the soft glow of the television on the wall. My chair was visible from where I stood, the old recliner by the window, the one Violet and I bought in 2003 after she said I needed somewhere comfortable to fall asleep while pretending to watch baseball. Hazel had been sitting in it more and more lately, curling her legs under herself as if occupation created ownership. That night I wondered if she was sitting in it already, relieved, perhaps even smiling, telling herself that difficult decisions were sometimes necessary. People like Hazel loved that phrase. Difficult decisions. It made cruelty sound mature. I stood there longer than I should have. Pride kept me upright for the first minute. Shock carried me through the second. After that, it was something closer to disbelief. I kept expecting the door to open, not because I believed Hazel would change her mind. Hazel never changed her mind after winning. But Edward, my boy, my only child, the baby Violet had labored 18 hours to bring into this world during a thunderstorm that knocked out power on half the west side. He might open the door. He might step out without his coat, ashamed and shivering, and say, "Dad, wait." This got out of hand. He might not know how to undo it, but he might at least know something needed undoing. I waited for that. I waited until snow collected on my shoes and melted through the seam near my left toe. I waited until my breath came out in thick white clouds. I waited until my left knee began to pulse in a warning rhythm. The door did not open. 20 minutes earlier, I had been sitting on the edge of the narrow bed in the small room off the hallway, the one Edward had cleaned out for me 3 years ago after my knee surgery. They called it the guest room when other people came over, but it had been a storage closet before I moved in. The ceiling was low, the window faced the neighbor's garage, and the radiator ticked loudly at night like it was counting down to something. I told myself it was enough. That was how the last 3 years had gone. I told myself enough about everything. The room was enough because Edward had offered. The folding desk was enough because I did not need much space. The single bookshelf was enough because I had donated most of my books to the community center. The narrow strip of closet where my clothes hung between boxes of Hazel's seasonal decorations was enough because an old man should not take up too much room. That is how dignity gets negotiated away. Not all at once. Little trades, little concessions, a chair here, a shelf there, a silent dinner, a swallowed comment, a joke you pretend did not sting, a room that used to hold broken lamps and tax records becoming the place you sleep, because your presence has become logistical. I had not meant to listen to them. I want that understood. There are men who lurk outside doors to collect evidence for resentment. I was never that man, but the walls in that house were thin, And Hazel did not lower her voice when she wanted Edward to absorb something as inevitable. She was in the kitchen, and she had chosen the tone she used when she wanted cruelty to sound like reason. "He is not even sick anymore, Edward." She said it calmly, almost gently, like a nurse explaining discharge instructions. "He walks around here like this is still his house." I heard a cabinet close. I could picture her standing by the counter, one hand around the stem of a wineglass, the other resting lightly on her hip, her posture arranged before my son like a legal argument. Edward answered too softly for me to hear at first. Then Hazel said it was his house. Past tense. We are the ones making payments now. That sentence made me look down at my hands. They were wide hands, scarred hands, the kind of hands that had lifted steel parts, repaired furnace belts, unclogged drains, held my son when fever took him, held my wife when the cancer made her too weak to stand, signed papers I should perhaps have read with less love and more suspicion. I had made 2 years of payments on that house before handing Edward the deed. I had paid the down payment. I had paid the back taxes when Edward's hours were cut in 2020. I had replaced the roof, the water heater, the old wiring in the upstairs bathroom, and somehow the story had become that they were carrying me. Hazel continued. She had prepared. That was the thing that hollowed me out before the door ever closed. This was not an outburst. This was not a bad moment. This was a presentation. She talked about Medicare paperwork as if it were a nuisance personally designed to ruin her evenings. She talked about grocery bills, though I bought most of my own food and pretended not to notice when the boys ate it. She talked about space, about privacy, about how difficult it was for a marriage to function with a parent constantly hovering. Hovering was one of her favorite words. It turned presence into trespass. If I walked into the kitchen for coffee while she packed lunches, I was hovering. If I sat in the living room after dinner, I was hovering. If I asked my grandsons how school was, I was hovering. If I mentioned that cereal for dinner 3 nights in a row might not be ideal, I was interfering. If I did not speak, I was sulking. Hazel had a gift for arranging every possible version of me into a problem. Edward murmured something again. Hazel's voice sharpened just enough to draw blood. "He needs to go. He has options. Plenty of people his age live independently." A pause. Then with careful restraint, "Or there are facilities. Facilities." The word did not enter my ears. It dropped into my chest like a stone into deep water, and for a moment everything inside me went still around it. Facilities meant nursing homes. It meant brochures she had probably researched at night on her phone while sitting in my chair. It meant a room with vinyl floors, a television mounted too high, a shared dining hall smelling of boiled vegetables, and cheerful staff trained to call men like me sweetheart, while waiting for us to forget our own names. It meant Hazel had already imagined my life after removal. It meant she had given shape to the disposal. I sat on the bed and looked at the go bag under the chair. The bag had been packed for 15 years. Nobody knew about it. Not Edward. Certainly not Hazel. It contained 2 changes of clothes, a laminated copy of my identification, some medication, cash sealed in plastic, an old pocket knife, a flashlight, and a folder of documents whose existence would have terrified Hazel if she had known. Old habits die hard when life teaches you that safety is sometimes a thing you build quietly, because the people closest to you may not recognize danger until it is named on television. I did not touch the bag at first. I sat there, listening to Hazel dismantle the remaining tenderness of the house 1 sentence at a time, and I tried to defend my son in my mind, because fathers are stupid that way. I told myself Edward was tired. I told myself Hazel was pressuring him. I told myself he would interrupt soon, would say, "That is my father," would put a wall where a son should put one. He did not. Then Hazel said, "I am not running a retirement home, Edward. I have 2 children, a marriage, a job, a life. Your father has had his life." That was when I stood. Not quickly. My knee would not allow dramatic exits. I stood like an old man stands when his body requires negotiation. But something in me had already crossed the room before my feet moved. I put on the brown coat Violet bought me in 2003 from the little shop on Reading Road, back when that stretch still had family stores and not vape shops with neon signs. Violet had insisted on the coat because she said the color made me look like a professor instead of a man who came home smelling like machine oil. I ran one hand over the sleeve now, feeling the worn fabric under my palm, and in that small touch I felt her more clearly than I had all week. I picked up the go bag and walked down the hall. The family photos watched me pass. There was Edward at 7, holding a baseball bat too large for him. Edward at 12 with braces and a forced smile. Edward at his high school graduation standing between me and Violet, pretending not to be proud that we were proud. Hazel had added newer photos over the years, professionally printed canvases of herself, Edward and the boys in matching sweaters by the river, but even in those, I appeared occasionally at the edge, smiling like a man who had been allowed into the frame. I paused for half a second at one photo of Violet holding newborn Edward. Her face was exhausted and radiant. His tiny fist was pressed against her collarbone. I almost turned back, not because of Hazel, because of that baby. Because the man in the kitchen had once been that baby. But memory is dangerous when it asks you to excuse the present forever. I entered the kitchen. Hazel stopped speaking immediately. Edward was standing near the sink, shoulders rounded forward, both hands on the counter as if he had been bracing himself. He looked at me and then looked down. That downward glance did more than Hazel's words. Shame was there, but shame without action is just self-pity in nicer clothes. Hazel lifted her chin. She had always been good at quick recovery. Her face shifted into a controlled expression of concern, like I had interrupted a difficult but loving discussion. "McCall," she said. She used my last name when she wanted emotional distance, without sounding openly rude. "I heard enough," I said. My voice surprised me. It was not loud. It was not broken. It was level, the way a man speaks when something inside him has become final. Edward pushed away from the counter. "Dad, wait." I held up one hand. "I am not doing the part where you apologize and we pretend." She did not say what she said. "I am too old for that scene." Hazel's eyes narrowed. "No one is asking you to leave tonight." I looked at her steadily. "Hazel, you have been asking me to leave since Labor Day. I am just finally listening." For a moment, nobody moved. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere upstairs, one of the boys laughed at something on a screen, not knowing a family line was snapping below him. Edward opened his mouth, closed it, then said my name again, softer. "Dad." Hazel turned toward him sharply, and whatever he had been about to say died under her look. It was small, that look, but I saw the machinery of their marriage in it. Edward had learned to hesitate before displeasing her. He had learned the cost of public contradiction. I knew because I had seen the same thing in him at dinner tables, school events, backyard barbecues, moments when Hazel's correction arrived before his thought finished forming. She had not broken him loudly. She had trained him through sighs, silence, withheld affection, small punishments disguised as disappointment. I had noticed. I had told myself it was their marriage, not mine. Another excuse. Another quiet failure. I turned toward the front door. That was when Hazel stopped disguising it. "Get out, you useless burden." Not a mutter. Not an accident. Full volume. The words came from a place she had prepared and polished. They did not tremble. They did not stumble. Edward did not correct her. I looked at him one last time. His face had gone pale, but his mouth remained closed. In that second, I saw the difference between weakness and betrayal, and it is a thin difference until you are standing on the wrong side of it. I opened the door and stepped into the winter. On the porch, after the door clicked shut, I considered walking back in. Not begging, not apologizing, just walking back in and saying, "No, this is my house. I am not leaving." But the deed was no longer in my name, at least not in the way Hazel understood. Legal truths can have hidden rooms, and mine had more than Hazel knew. But in that immediate moment, standing in the wind, I knew that even if I could reclaim the building, I could not reclaim the home. The air inside had changed. The kitchen had witnessed too much. My chair had already become evidence. My son's silence had moved into the walls. I stepped down from the porch, my bad knee protesting the first stair, then the second, and I walked west on Montana Avenue because my feet knew something my mind had not yet chosen. The neighborhood was quiet in the way Cincinnati neighborhoods get quiet during winter storms. Not peaceful exactly, but braced. Porches glowed with Christmas lights. Cars sat buried beneath softening white. A plastic reindeer tilted in somebody's yard, its head nodding faintly in the wind, as if agreeing with the absurdity of an old man walking alone with a go bag at 9 at night. My phone buzzed before I reached the corner. Edward. I looked at the name until the ringing stopped. It buzzed again. Edward. I let it ring again. A text appeared. Dad, where are you going? No question mark. Even his panic had bad grammar. I put the phone in my pocket. 2 blocks later, my left knee locked on a slick patch outside the old barber shop near Not. For a second, the whole world narrowed to the bright white flare of pain. My foot slipped forward. The go bag swung hard against my hip. I caught myself on the hood of a parked Buick, both palms slamming onto metal cold enough to sting. I did not fall all the way. That felt important at the time. Not all the way. Old men measure victories differently. I stood bent over the hood, breathing hard, snow gathering on my neck, the pain in my knee moving up and down like a cruel hand. In that moment, the anger drained out and left something worse beneath it. Shame. Not shame that Hazel had thrown me out. Shame that my body had nearly proven her right. Shame that my own knee had betrayed me in public, under Christmas lights, beside a shuttered barber shop, while my son sat inside a warm house doing whatever men do after failing their fathers. Here is what nobody tells you about age. It is not the birthdays. It is not the gray hair or the prescriptions or the way younger people begin explaining things you already know. It is the moment your body becomes available as evidence for people who want you diminished. You stumble and suddenly every opinion you have is old. You forget a name and suddenly your judgment is questionable. You sit down slowly and someone starts researching facilities. I stayed there with my hands on the Buick until the pain settled into something I could manage. Then I took out my phone, not to call Edward, not to call any person who would make me explain Hazel's words while they were still fresh enough to bleed, but to call Officer Dante Ramirez. Ramirez had been the first officer at the hospital the night Violet died in 1994. It had been December then too. I remember because the ambulance tires left black water tracks across the emergency entrance, and snow melted in the cuffs of my work pants, while a doctor with tired eyes said words that had no relationship to reality. Ramirez was younger then, barely past 30, with a mustache he later admitted was a mistake. He brought me coffee from a machine that produced something bitter and metallic, sat beside me until sunrise, and never once tried to fill the silence with advice. Over the years, he became the person who appeared at the edges of my life when the edges frayed. He checked on me after Violet's funeral. He came to Edward's graduation party. He showed up at the Foundation's early events in plain clothes and pretended it was coincidence. He owed me nothing. That perhaps is why I trusted him. He answered on the second ring. McCall, his voice was rough with sleep or age, maybe both. It is late, 9:43, I said, a pause. He heard something in my voice. Where are you, Montana and Not? Why? I looked at the snow collecting on the Buick hood beneath my hand. I fell a little, his tone changed. You fell, not all the way, McCall. Mostly my knee took a vote against continuing. I tried to make it light. It did not land. I heard movement on his end, keys, a door, the old rhythm of a man who did not ask whether help was needed when help was already happening. Stay on the line. Do not move. I am not moving because I am wise, not because you ordered me. Good. Be wise for 11 minutes. He arrived in 10.5. Department issued Ford. Headlights cutting through the storm, no siren, no flashing lights. Ramirez never liked spectacle. He stepped out with his collar turned up, looked at me sitting now on the Buick hood because standing had become more symbolic than practical, and said, "You look terrible. I have looked worse." He came closer, scanned my knee, my face, the go bag, the old coat, the wet shoes. His expression tightened at the edges. 1994 comes to mind. That landed deeper than I wanted. Cheap shot, accurate shot. He offered his arm without making a performance of it. That was Ramirez's gift. He could help without turning you into someone help. I took his arm. He guided me to the passenger seat. Steady pressure at my elbow, no fuss, no pity. The heat hit my face when I got inside, and for a moment I nearly closed my eyes. What happened? He asked after pulling back onto Montana. Hazel happened. He nodded as if I had named a weather system. She finally said it out loud, full volume. Edward. I watched snow slide across the windshield. Edward stood there. Ramirez's jaw moved once. Where do you want to go? I should have said a hotel. I should have said a clinic. I should have said Jameson Pierce's office, my attorney on Erie Avenue, because if anyone knew how to turn pain into paperwork, it was Jameson. Instead, I said, drive. I need 10 minutes. Ramirez drove. We moved through Westwood slowly, past houses I knew by memory, past the church on Epworth, past the Dominican place where I bought rice and beans every Sunday after Mass even though Violet had been the Catholic, and I had mostly attended for her singing. The heater hummed, my knee throbbed, my phone buzzed again, then again. Edward, Hazel, Edward. I turned it face down on my thigh. Ramirez glanced at it but said nothing. 2 minutes later, his own phone buzzed. He looked at the screen and did not answer. Then it buzzed again, and again. Something changed in his face. McCall, he said quietly, I made a call when you called me. To who? Deacon Morrison. I turned my head slowly. Dante, he kept his eyes on the road. You were sitting in snow after being put out of your house. I called one person. One person does not make your phone vibrate like that. The call got away from me. Calls do not get away. People make them walk. He almost smiled. Then this one ran. When he slowed near the Westwood Community Center, I understood. The building sat at the corner of Budinot and Epworth, lit from within like a ship in a storm. Cars lined both sides of the street. People stood in the parking lot, on the sidewalk, under umbrellas, beside idling vehicles, holding candles cupped against the wind. Not 10 people, not 20, hundreds, teachers, parents, old neighbors, teenagers in hoodies, church ladies in heavy coats, men from the veterans group, women from the scholarship committee, kids who had once used the after-school program and were now grown enough to bring children of their own. They stood in the snow for me, or rather, they stood for what they knew me to be, the version of me my own son had somehow never bothered to meet. The Westwood Community Center had begun as a failing brick building with a leaking roof and a gym floor warped by years of neglect. I bought it in 2001 through the Violet-Donovan Community Foundation, named for my wife, built in silence because grief needed somewhere to go, and I did not want that somewhere to be a bottle or a grave. The foundation had funded 14 schools across Ohio, Kentucky, and Indiana, 6 after-school programs, reading circles, food programs, summer camps, college scholarships, emergency heating repairs for families who would never know the check writer's name. For 30 years, I had signed the documents as Raymond McCall, using my father's first name because anonymity gave the work room to stay clean. Westwood knew, not all at once and not officially, but neighborhoods are living things. They learn. They keep secrets when the secret fades. Children. Everybody knew enough to protect it. Everybody, apparently, but Edward. Ramirez parked near the side entrance. There are news vans, he said. I want you prepared. I stared at him. News vans, too. I am wearing a 30-year-old coat. It is a good coat. It is a very good coat. Violet picked it. The name quieted the car. Outside, people had begun turning toward us. Some recognized Ramirez's vehicle. Some recognized me through the windshield. The crowd shifted, not rushing, just orienting. It scared me more than the snow. I had spent 30 years avoiding stages, cameras, plaques, speeches. I had built in quiet because the work was hers, not mine. Now the quiet had broken open. Getting me inside took longer than I liked. Ramirez wanted medical evaluation. I refused with what dignity I could muster. Paulette Green, director of the after-school program, met us at the side door with tears in her eyes and a practical scarf already unwound to wrap around my neck. Do not start, I warned her. She started anyway. Mr. McCall, you are freezing. I noticed. Your knee, attached, barely from the looks of it. Paulette. She pressed her lips together and nodded, but her hands trembled as she guided me through the hallway. The building smelled like coffee, floor wax, wet wool, and children's tempera paint. The smell nearly broke me. This was not a facility. This was not disposal. This was a place alive with use. Lockers dented by years of backpacks. Bulletin boards covered with construction paper snowflakes. A row of donated winter coats near the entrance. A mural of Violet's favorite line from Langston Hughes, painted along the hallway because one year, a 5th grader insisted poetry belonged near the gym. When we entered the main room, the applause began. It started with one person near the back, then spread before I could stop it. People stood, some cried, some simply put a hand over their heart. A teenage boy I did not recognize shouted, "We love you, Mr. McCall," and then looked embarrassed, but nobody laughed. I had no speech ready. I had no face ready. I looked at the ceiling because if I looked at the people, the old brown coat would not be enough to hold me together. "All right," I said, loud enough to carry. "Everybody go home before you catch pneumonia. Violet would be furious with every single one of you. Laughter moved through the room, warm and cracked and real. It saved me. They brought me into the back office, elevated my leg on a chair, and gave me coffee so strong it could have removed paint. Through the interior window, I could see the edge of Violet's portrait hanging in the main hall. 6 feet tall, framed in dark mahogany, painted from a photograph taken the summer Edward was born. Violet in a yellow dress, laughing over her shoulder, hair caught by wind, eyes bright with the kind of joy that made rooms rearrange around her. Beneath it, carved into the wall in letters I had chosen myself, built by Raymond, in love, in silence, forever. I had intended the inscription to be private and public at the same time. Those who knew would know. Those who did not would still feel the shape of devotion. I never imagined my son would first read it on the night he helped make me homeless. Ramirez stepped into the office with his phone in hand. Edward is on his way. I looked up. You called him? Yes. What did you tell him? That his father was found semi-conscious in the snow on Not Avenue and that he needed to come immediately. I stared at him. Semi-conscious? You were conscious. That is not the point. I left room for urgency. You left room for a lawsuit. He will survive the wording. I rubbed my forehead. What else did you leave out? Most of the foundation, the crowd, the cameras, Dante. He needs to walk into it. That was true. I hated that it was true. While we waited, the community center settled into a strange, electric hush. Outside the office, Paulette spoke to a reporter in a steady voice that carried through the door in fragments. 30 years, 14 schools, scholarships, anonymous donor, Violet.And, Westwood, children, heat repairs, college tuition, dignity. She said the word dignity, and I looked down at my hands again because that word had been missing from the kitchen, where Hazel called me a burden. My phone buzzed. Hazel. I did not answer. It buzzed again. Hazel. Then a text appeared. Where are you? Edward is gone. What did you do? I almost laughed. What did I do? She had thrown me into a snowstorm, and already the story in her mind was rearranging itself so she could be injured by the consequences. At 10:41, the front door opened. I did not see Edward enter, but I heard the room change. Footsteps have personalities if you listen long enough. Violet used to say she could tell whether I had had a good shift by how I came down the hall. Edward's footsteps across the community center floor were fast, uneven and frightened. Not grief, not yet, panic, the kind that calculates liability before it recognizes loss. He appeared in the office doorway with snow in his hair and his coat half-zipped. He looked at me first, and I saw the speech he had prepared, some mixture of worry, irritation, apology, and self-defense. Then his eyes moved past me through the office window to the portrait in the main hall. Everything in his face stopped. For 3 seconds, he was a child again, not because he looked young, but because his defenses had not caught up. His mouth opened. His hand gripped the door frame. Dad, he said, but the word had changed. It was no longer inconvenience. It was disbelief. Sit down before you fall down, I said. He did not sit. He stepped inside slowly, eyes fixed on Violet. That is Mom. Yes. On the wall. Yes. How long has she been on that wall? Since 2018. October. Her birthday. He turned toward me as if I had spoken in a language he almost understood. You put her there. I funded the portrait. You funded. He stopped, looked again, saw the inscription, built by Raymond, in love, in silence, forever. His lips moved around the words without sound. Raymond, he said finally. That was Grandpa's name. Yes. He sat then, not because I told him to, but because his legs seemed uncertain of the floor. What is this place? He asked. It was a terrible question, not because he asked it, but because he had lived 3 miles away for years and did not know. I folded my hands over my bad knee. The Violet.And Community Foundation, incorporated December 1995, 1 year after your mother died. His eyes flicked toward me. I thought, you thought I went to grief group on Tuesdays for 30 years. He looked ashamed. I did not think about it. No, I said. You did not. The words were not cruel. They were worse than cruel. They were accurate. I told him then. Not everything, but enough to make the air heavy. 14 schools funded. 6 after-school programs. Reading circles. Emergency rent assistance. Heating repairs. Scholarship funds that had sent 231 children to college as of last June. A building purchased in 2001. Roof replaced in 2009. Gym added in 2011. HVAC replaced in 2019 because children were wearing coats indoors and Violet had once said, no child should have to keep a coat on to learn multiplication. Edward listened with his elbows on his knees, both hands pressed together near his mouth. His eyes reddened. Where did the money come from? He asked. You worked at the factory. I did. We were not rich. No, then how? I looked toward Violet's portrait. Your grandfather left me more than you knew when he died in 1993. Not a fortune by the standards of men who name buildings after themselves, but enough. After your mother died, I put it into a trust. I never touched it personally. Not $1. Edward swallowed hard. Why did you not tell me? I let the question sit long enough for him to feel its weight. Because you would have told Hazel. He flinched as if I had slapped him. Dad and Hazel would have made it a conversation about assets, inheritance, obligation, control. This was never about that. It was about Violet. It was about making sure the love of my life did not disappear into a cemetery plot and a few old photographs. He stood abruptly and walked to the interior window. His back was to me, shoulders shaking once before he locked them down. Men of his generation learned some of my worst lessons. Hide the breaking, make grief presentable. He stared at his mother's laughing face. She would have hated the fuss, he said hoarsely. Yes, then she would have gone home and cried in the bathroom so nobody saw. Also yes. He made a sound that nearly was a laugh, and in it I heard the boy who used to crawl into our bed during thunderstorms and deny it the next morning. For one fragile moment, I saw my son under the man Hazel had trained into caution. Then his phone began buzzing. He pulled it out, saw the screen, and went pale again. 17 missed calls. Hazel's mother, Hazel's sister, 2 neighbors, Hazel herself. A text sat at the top, and I asked him to read it aloud because I wanted the words in the room. He hesitated, then read. They are saying on the news he built the whole community center. They are saying he has been funding schools for 30 years. Edward, my mother just called me. My sister just called me. Please tell me this is not what it looks like. He lowered the phone. In another life, I might have enjoyed that. Hazel watching television in my living room, maybe in my chair, seeing the 11 o'clock news introduced the useless burden she had expelled into a blizzard. As a man the neighborhood had honored in silence for 3 decades. There should have been satisfaction. There was some, I will not lie. But mostly I felt tired. Tired that goodness had needed publicity to become visible to my own family. Tired that dignity sometimes requires witnesses before people believe it exists. Edward turned back toward me. Dad, what Hazel said. I am not having that conversation tonight. Please. No. Tonight I am accepting exactly one apology, and it will be yours. Then I am sleeping somewhere warm. His face crumpled. Not fully. He fought it. I am sorry, he said. No preamble, no defense. I am sorry I let her say it. I am sorry I stood there. I am sorry I closed the door. I do not know what is wrong with me. I do, I said quietly. He looked up. You got used to peace at any price. Then you made me pay it. That landed. He closed his eyes. Yes, do not say yes because it sounds right. Sit with it until it hurts. He nodded. Ramirez appeared in the doorway. There is a reporter who wants to speak with you. Tell him 5 minutes. Tell her 5 minutes. He nodded and stepped out. I reached into my go bag and took out the manila envelope. It was thick, rubber-banded, with Jameson Pierce's return address in the corner. I placed it on the desk between us. Edward stared at it. What is that? My updated estate documents. The room seemed to tighten around him. Dad signed and filed 3 weeks ago. That was not entirely because of Hazel. The paperwork had been in motion before that night. I had seen enough by then. Labor Day, Thanksgiving, the way Hazel corrected my grandsons when they thanked me too warmly, the way Edward let her move my tools from the garage to the shed without asking, the way the house had slowly changed language around me. Mine became ours. Ours became theirs. I had already known. The kitchen only finished the sentence. The house on Maplewood, I said. The one I paid off. The one I signed over to you. It has been retitled into the Foundation's control under the conditional transfer documents you signed when I gave it to you. Edward stared at me, unable to speak. You did not read them. You trusted me, which was fine. I was worthy of that trust. Hazel, however, was not. What does that mean? It means the house will become transitional housing for families connected to the after-school program. 2 units upstairs, 1 downstairs, shared kitchen support, case management through the foundation. His face drained. Hazel lives there for 60 days. The boys live there, that one hurt. I let it show because some truths deserve visible cost. The boys will not be put out in the snow. The foundation has temporary housing options. You will have choices to make. Hazel will have fewer. Dad, she will. As she called me a useless burden. I am making sure that house becomes useful to people who understand what shelter means. He leaned back like the chair had betrayed him. What about me? There it was, the question under all family panic. Not what have I done, not what do I owe. What about me? I looked at him, and because he was my son, I answered without cruelty. You have 60 days to decide whether you are Hazel's husband first, or your own man first. I cannot decide that for you, and if I choose wrong, then you will live with the choice. He looked toward Violet again, and for the first time that night, he looked frightened in a way that had nothing to do with money. He looked like a man realizing his mother, dead 30 years, had become a standard he had failed. I stood slowly. My niece screamed. I ignored it. Edward rose too, instinctively reaching toward me, then stopping because he did not know whether he had the right. That hesitation told me we had crossed into a new country. I am not a burden, I said. I never was. The next person who builds a life on my foundation while calling me useless is going to learn what this family is actually worth, and none of it will be left to them. I picked up the go bag. Now I am going to speak to the reporter. Dad, I paused at the door. What? His eyes were wet. Where will you sleep tonight? Somewhere warm. Can I? He stopped. The old reflex, to offer what he should have offered before it mattered, came too late. No, I said. Not tonight. The reporter was young, serious, holding a microphone like she understood it could wound if pointed carelessly. Paulette stood beside her with the quiet pride of a woman who had kept a secret for 30 years, and could finally stop. The camera light came on. Somewhere across Cincinnati, Hazel was almost certainly watching from my chair. I hoped she was. I hoped the room was quiet. I hoped her mother was calling. I hoped the boys were asking questions she could not answer. The reporter said, Mr. Donovan, can you tell us about the foundation? I looked straight into the camera. 72 years old. One bad knee. Old brown coat. Snow melting on my shoes. 30 years of silence standing behind me in the form of a woman in a yellow dress. It is a love story, I said. It started the night my wife died, and it has been going on for 30 years. Behind me, through the open office door, I heard Edward make a sound. Not polished crying, not the contained kind men use in public. Something rougher. Good. Some lessons have to cost something before they stick. The interview lasted 6 minutes. I said less than they wanted, and more than I had planned. I spoke of Violet, not myself. I spoke of children wearing coats indoors. I spoke of fathers working overtime and mothers choosing between medicine and rent. I spoke of how a neighborhood can hold a person upright when family forgets how. I did not mention Hazel. I did not mention Edward. Revenge does not always require naming people. Sometimes it is enough to tell the truth so clearly that everyone who lied hears themselves in the silence around it. By midnight, the clip had been shared across Cincinnati. By morning, it had crossed into state news. By Sunday, people who had never heard of the Violet Donovan Community Foundation were leaving messages, donations, apologies, stories. Hazel called me 34 times. I did not answer. She texted first in anger, then in panic, then in the careful tone of a woman drafting evidence. Raymond, I think emotions ran high. Raymond, please call Edward. Raymond, the boys are confused. Raymond, we need to discuss the house like adults. By Monday morning, she was using words like misunderstanding, stress, elder care concerns, and family healing. On Tuesday, her attorney called Jameson Pierce. By Wednesday, Jameson called me laughing so hard he had to clear his throat before becoming professional. She claims undue influence, he said. On whom? On Edward. By me. Apparently, she threw me out. Yes, that complicates her moral position. And the legal one. Charles, legally she is standing in a house she does not own, arguing that the man she called a burden had too much influence over the son who let her evict him. So not strong, not strong. Edward came to see me 4 days later at Ramirez's house, where I had taken the guest room after refusing every offer from foundation board members, church ladies, and one very insistent school principal who said her husband could sleep on the couch. Ramirez's wife, Elena, made soup thick enough to qualify as architecture, and pretended not to monitor my knee every time I stood. Edward arrived alone. That mattered. He looked exhausted. Hazel wanted to come, he said from the doorway. I told her no, that is a start. He flinched, then nodded. We sat at Elena's kitchen table, while Ramirez discreetly left the room, and then very undiscreetly listened from the den. Edward wrapped both hands around a mug of coffee. She says you planned this to humiliate her. I planned the foundation before Hazel knew how to spell my name. The house I planned when she began measuring my life in square footage. He looked down. She is angry, I imagine. She says you are destroying our family. I leaned back. Edward, your family was already in trouble when your wife could call your father useless, and you could close the door. His face tightened. I know, do you? I am starting to. Starting is not enough. He looked up then, and for once there was no defensiveness in him. Tell me what enough looks like. I appreciated the question. It was the first practical one he had asked. Enough looked like truth in stages. He would tell the boys what happened, not Hazel's edited version. He would explain that I left because disrespect has consequences, not because I was confused or dramatic. He would attend 2 foundation meetings before making any decisions about his own future, because a man should understand what he almost allowed his wife to discard. He would speak to an attorney separate from Hazel's. He would stop using the phrase caught in the middle, because he had not been caught. He had chosen passivity and called it neutrality. With each condition, he seemed to shrink and straighten at the same time. And Hazel, he asked. Hazel has 60 days. She will not go quietly, then she will go loudly. Dad, no. You do not get to manage my tone now. He nodded once. You are right. The boys changed before anyone else did. Children always do. They feel structural damage before adults admit the beams are cracking. Caleb, the older one, 14, called me a week after the news story. His voice was stiff, embarrassed. Grandpa, I am here. A pause. Mom said you are trying to take our house. There it was. Hazel had not wasted time. I closed my eyes. What do you think? I do not know, honest boy. Do you remember the community center, the place with the basketball court? Yes. I went there for tutoring once. Mom said it was charity stuff. Of course she did. That house will help families who need a safe place while they get back on their feet. But we live there, for now. He was quiet a long time. Dad cried. That one hurt differently. I know, I never saw him cry before. Neither did I not like that. Mom says you embarrassed us. I looked at the wall of Ramirez's guest room, at a crucifix above the dresser, at the small framed photo of Ramirez's grandchildren. Sometimes embarrassment is what happens when private behavior meets public truth. Caleb did not answer, but he did not hang up either. Can I still call you? He asked. My throat tightened. Always, even if Mom says not to, especially then. The younger boy, Jonah 8, made me a card. Ramirez brought it in from the mailbox 2 weeks later, with a face that told me he had already read the envelope, even if not the card. Inside, in crooked pencil, Jonah had drawn the community center with snow on the roof, and a stick figure in a brown coat standing beside a giant yellow lady. Underneath, he wrote, I did not know Grandma was famous. I am sorry Mom was mean. Please come to my concert. Children simplify what adults bury under language. I went to the concert. Hazel sat 3 rows ahead and did not turn around. Edward sat beside her, shoulders tense. Caleb waved at me from the stage. Jonah sang too loudly and off rhythm, which Violet would have adored. Afterward, Hazel approached me in the lobby with a smile so controlled it looked painful. Raymond, she said, loud enough for nearby parents to hear, we are glad you could come. I looked at her for a long second. My name is McCall to you. Her smile flickered. Of course. She leaned closer, lowering her voice. This public punishment is hurting the boys. No, I said. Your private conduct is hurting the boys. The public part only made it harder for you to lie about. Her face hardened. There she was, beneath the community smile, beneath the mother costume, the same woman from the kitchen. You are enjoying this, less than you think, more than I should. She stared at me. You will die alone if you keep this up. I felt the old instinct to absorb, to smooth, to reduce conflict for the sake of peace. Then I saw Jonah watching us from near the classroom door, card in his hand, eyes moving between adults. I lowered my voice. Better alone than useful only to people who hate needing me. Hazel stepped back first. The 60 days became a siege. Hazel refused every reasonable transition offer from the foundation because accepting help would admit loss. She hosted her mother and sister in the living room and spoke loudly about elder manipulation, stolen inheritance, and public relations stunts. She tried to organize neighbors, but the neighbors had watched the news, and several had children or grandchildren who had benefited from foundation programs. Sympathy did not gather where she expected. Edward moved through the house like a ghost, sleeping some nights in the basement, some nights not at all. He attended the foundation meetings as promised. The first time, he sat in the back while Paulette presented winter meal program numbers. He cried quietly when he realized how many children were being fed out of the budget line he had never known existed. The second meeting, he asked questions. The third, he volunteered to help repair shelving in the reading room. Hazel called it performative. Maybe at first it was, but repetition changes men if shame does not rot them first. On the 59th day, Hazel left, not gracefully. She staged the departure like a martyrdom, loading boxes into a rented truck, while her sister filmed on a phone until Ramirez, off-duty but present because he understood human nature, advised her that recording minors and foundation staff would create legal complications. She took furniture she had purchased, furniture she claimed to have purchased, and several items that belonged to me until Jameson's inventory list made their return advisable. She left my chair on the curb, perhaps as a final insult. Snow had begun again, lighter than the night she threw me out. I stood across the street beside Edward, watching transitional housing staff enter the house with clipboards. The boys were with Hazel's mother for the weekend. Edward looked ruined. "I do not know what happens now," he said. "Good," I said. "Certainty made you lazy." He almost smiled, but it did not reach his eyes. "Do you hate her?" "No. Do you hate me?" I watched two volunteers carry boxes of donated kitchen supplies up the porch steps. "No. Do you forgive me?" That question came too soon. He knew it as soon as he asked. I turned to him. "I love you." Forgiveness is still working its way through the snow. He nodded, eyes wet. "That is fair." The house changed faster than I expected and slower than I wanted. Walls were repainted. Locks changed. The upstairs bedrooms became small family suite. The basement became storage and case management space. The living room, my living room, became a shared common area with durable sofas and a bookshelf built by Edward and me over 3 silent Saturdays. My chair was gone. I did not ask where. Some objects cannot survive their final meaning. The first family moved in March. A mother named Talia with 2 children, fleeing a landlord who had locked them out after she missed rent during chemotherapy. The little girl, Amari, chose the room that had once been mine, because she liked the small window facing the neighbor's garage. "It feels secret," she said. I stood in the doorway after she ran off, and felt the old closet bedroom shift in my memory. Not erased, repurposed. There is a difference. Edward separated from Hazel in April. Not divorced yet. Men like Edward untangle slowly because guilt knots with habit. Hazel moved into her sister's house and began telling anyone who would listen that I had brainwashed him with charity theater. Caleb called me every Sunday. Jonah wrote more cards, mostly about school, sometimes about Grandma Violet, whom he had begun drawing always in yellow. I did not move back into Maplewood. I rented a small apartment near the community center, 2nd floor, 1 bedroom, no stairs after the elevator, good heat, view of the parking lot. People called it modest. I called it mine. The ending, if you want one, is not that my family healed under Violet's portrait while snow melted, and everyone learned gratitude. Life is not that generous. Hazel did not become kind. Edward did not become brave overnight. I did not become soft simply because I was proved right. Something in me closed the night that door clicked shut, and though other things opened afterward, that particular chamber remains sealed. I still wake sometimes hearing Hazel's voice say useless burden, with the clean confidence of someone certain the world agrees. I still see Edward's hand on the door frame, not stopping me. I still feel the Buick hood under my palms, and my knee nearly giving out beneath the weight of age and humiliation. The foundation grew. Donations increased. More children received scholarships. The transitional house filled, emptied, and filled again. Violet's name became known in places she had never walked, and maybe that is the only mercy worth trusting. 1 year later, on another December night, the community center held a scholarship dinner. Snow fell again, gentler this time, but I did not romanticize it. Snow is still cold, even when memory tries to make it symbolic. I wore the brown coat. Edward stood beside me near Violet's portrait, older than he had looked the year before. Shame had aged him, but work had steadied him. He had spent the afternoon repairing a loose railing without being asked. Hazel did not attend. Caleb and Jonah did. Jonah stood under the portrait, looked up at Violet's laughing face, and asked, "Grandpa, did she really laugh like that?" I looked at the painting. "Louder," I said. He grinned. "Before dinner, Paulette asked me to say a few words. I did not want to. I never want to. But the room was full of children wearing warm coats indoors because they had chosen to keep them on, not because the heat was broken. And that felt like a victory Violet would have counted. I stood at the front, bad knee aching, hands resting on the podium. Edward watched from the side. Ramirez stood near the back with his arms crossed, pretending he was not emotional. The boys sat together, Caleb serious, Jonah swinging his legs. I looked at all of them and felt no plain peace. Only weight, only truth, only the strange, cold gift of surviving people's worst estimate of you. "I built this in silence," I said, "because grief needed work, and because my wife deserved a legacy that fed people instead of flattering me. Silence can be useful. It can protect what is sacred, but silence can also teach the wrong people that you have no voice. I learned that late. I am still learning it." The room stayed quiet. "If you remember anything about this place, remember this. No person who needs help is a burden. No old man, no child, no mother between jobs, no student without tuition, no family in winter. A burden is not a person. A burden is the lie that usefulness is the price of being allowed to stay." I stopped there because my throat had tightened, and because saying more would have made the room too soft. People clapped. I looked at the ceiling. Old trick. Afterward, Edward walked me outside. The snow made the parking lot shine under the streetlights. "Dad," he said, "I know you said forgiveness is still working through the snow. I remember. Is it any closer?" I looked at him. "My son, my failure, my boy." The man who had closed a door, and the man now standing in the cold beside me, without asking me to go back inside before I was ready. "Some days," I said. He nodded, accepting the answer without trying to improve it. "That was new. I will keep showing up," he said. "Do that." He went back inside. I stayed outside for a moment longer, letting the wind cut through the old coat. Across the street, the community center glowed. Violet's portrait was not visible from where I stood, but I knew exactly where it was, laughing forever in yellow, held in light. Somewhere in the transitional house on Maplewood, a mother was putting her children to bed in a room that had once held my small, negotiated life. Somewhere Hazel was telling a version of the story in which she had been wronged. Somewhere Edward was learning that love without courage becomes permission for cruelty. Somewhere my grandsons were growing around the knowledge that adults can fail and still choose differently later. And I, 73 by then, bad knee and all, stood in the snow and understood that survival is not the same as restoration. I had won if winning means the truth came out. I had lost if losing means the house where my wife once laughed could never again be entered without hearing the door close behind me. Both were true. That is the part stories often clean up, because audiences like justice neat and pain useful. But real justice is colder than that. It leaves you with your dignity, yes, but also with the memory of why you had to fight for it. It gives you back your name, but not the version of yourself who believed your own son would never stand silent. It turns a house into shelter, a secret into a legacy, a humiliation into a boundary. It does not turn winter warm. The snow kept falling on Westwood, on Not and Epworth, on Montana Avenue, on the old house on Maplewood, on 14 schools across 3 states, on children sleeping under roofs they did not know were held up by a woman named Violet, on a son learning late, on a daughter-in-law learning nothing, and on an old man in a brown coat who had finally stopped mistaking silence for peace. I turned toward the apartment I now called home and walked slowly, carefully, one step at a time, because my knee still hurt, because the sidewalks were slick, because age does not vanish just because truth arrives, and because dignity, like winter walking, requires attention. Behind me, the community center lights stayed on. This time, I had paid for the heat. This time, no child inside needed a coat, unless they wanted one. That was enough. Not comfort, not healing. Enough.